Today is the 12th of September, 2017, and this is Athens Speakout number 413. At this point, we have concluded all I wish to say about Mearsheimer and Walt and their criticism of Israeli foreign policy. And I'm enclosing a map of Israel and the occupied territories as of 2005. And you can see the small green spots are the few self-supporting olive groves still remaining in Palestine. Gaza, the solid strip down there near Egypt, is an open-air concentration camp of impoverished Palestinians, which only have a few United Nations officials who have visited. As far as I know, only one former U.S. Senator has visited the Gaza Strip. I met this former senator from Illinois, Paul Simon, who told me about his visit after he retired from the Senate. And of course, he thought it was a tragedy, but there is nothing we can do on the mass media about it at this point. And he decided not to run again. It was too expensive to raise money. So I have a question now for Dave. Do you want to say anything about climate change, the hurricanes, Harvey and Irma? Do you have any new news on that, or
I do have some new news.
You just leave it blank.
There are five congressmen in Ohio who voted against disaster relief for these two hurricanes. Who voted against the $15 billion disaster relief package to
and all five are
victims.
Republican, I take it.
All five are Republicans. Everyone who voted against the disaster relief are Republicans. All 90 in the U.S. House who voted against it were Republicans, and all 17 in the U.S. Senate who voted against providing disaster relief.
17 Republicans?
In the U.S. Senate. They were all Republicans.
Oh, some of the senators didn't do it.
17 of them. 80 voted in favor of it.
Oh, okay. Let's get that a little bit clear.
So in the House, in the U.S. House,
yeah, I got that's clear.
Disaster relief passed by a vote of 316 to 90.
Right.
All 90 who voted against it were Republicans.
Right.
In the U.S. Senate on Thursday, it passed 80 to 17.
Both Democrats and Republicans.
Right. All who voted against it, again, were Republicans. All Democrats in both chambers voted for disaster relief.
And who are these 17 senators? Is that it, 17?
Well, it wasn't both Rob Portman and Sherrod Brown voted for it. But Ohio did have 5 congressmen that voted.
We got the Congress pretty clear
against it. And that includes Senator or Congressman Jim Renacci, who's running for governor. It includes Jim Jordan, Brad Wenstrup, Mike Turner, and Warren Davidson.
Good.
So what I did was I looked up their records.
Good.
I looked up their records for supporting pro-environmental protection, anti-climate catastrophe protection legislation.
Good.
They have an average of rejecting environmental bills 96.4% of the time. They've also received a combined total of $2,078,000 from the oil and gas energy industries. Jim Renacci himself has voted against the climate, has voted against the environment, has voted against any protections, any regulations, 97% of the time throughout his career. He voted 100% of the time against the environment in 2016. He's received $251,000 in campaign donations from the oil and gas industry, $167 $1,000 from the
Great
electric
research.
utilities
Great research.
industry and $597,000 from individuals and super political action committees in the energy sector. Jim, I can go through all 5 of them because I did all 5.
Good.
Jim Jordan has voted against the environment 96% of the time throughout his career. He voted against the environment 100% of the time in 2016. He's received $125,000 in donations from the oil and gas industry, $150,000 from electric utilities, and $325,000 from super PACs in the energy industry. And it goes on for Ben Wenstrup, Mike Turner, and Warren Davidson, all of them voting against environmental policies and anti-climate change prevention efforts 96 to 97 to 98% of the time, and receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars from the oil and gas industry and the energy sector for their reelection. Now, if they're going to vote against the environment all of the time, and they're going to take this money from the fossil fuel industry to buy their votes, the least they can do when disaster strikes and floods millions of Americans' homes and renders millions of Americans homeless and destroys everything that millions of Americans worked their entire lives to build, the least they can do is support disaster relief efforts. But they can't even bring themselves to do that. They should be ashamed of themselves, they should be kicked out of office, and no American deserves to have people like that representing them in the United States Congress. That's my position.
Well, I don't disagree, except that the question is, how do intelligent people with some science convince the Trump voters, who are mostly 18-year-old in mentality and have never read a book since they left high school? They don't know anything about science. They don't know anything about global warming. And what we should do as intelligent people is to draft a bipartisan resolution, and we'll ask the 100 senators to sign it, both Democrats and Republicans, and the 50 governors to sign it. We'll see who signs it, and it will be a very simple thing. The question is, do you believe that climate change is a hoax? And we'll see how many true Christians or Jews or scientists will vote for that resolution. And they should be standing up and counted for the next election. That's my position of what we should do. Stand up and be counted.
Well, I would like to put them on the record on these things, and some of them will. I think that us in the media as journalists have an obligation to continue to highlight these things for the public. I think
Right.
any newspaper, local community newspaper in the congressional districts that these people represent wouldn't be doing their job if they didn't highlight these facts.
Right.
And I think it's incumbent on journalists to keep working hard and keep bringing these issues to light and shining the spotlight on them for the public, so that the public knows where their representatives are getting their campaign donations and how that's affecting their votes. And I think that hopefully with a well-informed public will make responsible decisions when they get to the ballot box.
Okay. I think maybe we're ready for the second question. That's left over from last week, or last 3 weeks, I guess, because we've been postponed a while. And you asked the question, why was the Clinton administration so weak in preserving the peace? And I have several answers to that question, so I will review my understanding of Bill Clinton's administration. He was elected in 1992, and he served 2 terms until 2000. I voted for Clinton and assumed he had learned his lessons from the failure of the long wars in Indochina of Lyndon Baines Johnson and Richard Nixon. I thought He would stay out of foreign wars. Now, George Herbert Walker Bush, 41 in 1992, advised staying out of any Yugoslavian civil war. The Republicans wanted to intervene in Afghanistan and Iraq. Somehow, the New York Times convinced Clinton that he had to stop ethnic cleansing of the Serbs against the Croats and the Bosnians in the Federal Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia. For unexplained reasons, Jews in the mass media and in the Democratic Party preferred Muslims in Bosnia over Orthodox Serbs. If the American military complex, the American military-industrial complex extended U.S. military bases in Yugoslavia under the control of NATO, it would have helped NATO to expand its original geographic limits under the NATO Treaty of 1949. The NATO expansion was led by Germany, which would gain economic concessions in Slovenia and Croatia in the event of Yugoslavia's breakup. Martin Indyk, one of the deputy directors of AIPAC, the American Israel Political Action Committee, served in Clinton's National Security Council. Indyk became Clinton's ambassador to Israel from 1995 to 1997, and again from 2000 to 2001. A second important Jew in the Clinton administration was Dennis Ross, Clinton's special envoy to the Middle East. He was promoted to one of Clinton's advisors during the Camp David summit talks between the Palestinians and the Israeli government in July of 2000, at the tail end of his administration. Those talks, like so many previous talks, led to no conclusion. The state of Israel had the money and the weapons. The Palestinians, who have remained a poor, occupied people. So, do you have any objections to my analysis of Clinton's weakness in foreign policy?
No, not particularly. I think that I have plenty of my own disagreements with Clinton's foreign policy. I think, well, mostly with regard to Bosnia and what he did there.
Right.
And especially his bombing of pharmaceutical factories.
Yeah, and he bombed Belgrade.
Right. And
now, the one thing you can say about Clinton that was positive was that he didn't put many American land troops in there. He let the Germans and NATO do all of that, and the United States only provided air cover for the NATO intervention in destroying
that's true.
Yugoslavia. So he lost fewer men than Johnson and Nixon did in the long Indo-Chinese wars.
Yeah.
So the casualties were kind of small. I think the United States only lost less than 100 pilots or spies.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's the end of Clinton's administration. He was a disappointment to me as a dove and a pacifist. So back to Donald Trump. Question one again is, how many days has Trump been in office now? Do we have any figures?
Specific days? Oh,
well, it was over 100 days. You know, this 100 days,
Yeah,
He's now into 200 days, isn't he?
yeah, probably. It's been over, well, it's coming up on 9 months here
Yeah,
in
okay.
8 days.
Yeah.
So,
All right. So we have Clinton as a do-nothing president as far as peace is concerned. Has he accomplished anything?
most of his accomplishments are negative accomplishments, meaning
Right.
that he hasn't actually done anything constructive himself. What he's done is a tearing down of things that were done in the Obama administration. From DACA, the DACA executive order, to a wide variety of other rules and executive orders with regard to sexual assault on university campuses, protection of anti-discrimination policies in the workplace, early childhood education policies, various health and human services policies. Mostly what he's done is dismantle programs and rules and protections that the Obama administration put into place. Now, that's all negative accomplishments. If you hated those things, then you would see that as something of a win. It's also not anything significant that can't be subsequently reversed by the next president, because these are all executive actions.
Provided the next president is a Democrat.
Right, or has the will or the want to do so. Legislatively, he hasn't been able to work with Republican majorities in U.S. Congress to accomplish anything.
Right. Well, I think he has made two positive contributions. He has appointed Rex Tillerson as his Secretary of State, and Rex Tillerson, as an oil baron, is competent. He does know something about international relations, but they're very narrow-minded. They're very concerned with the oil empire in the Middle East. But he has got he was better than some of the other candidates, that's all I can say. And the second thing, he has appointed a conservative Supreme Court justice to replace Scalia, who apparently has the same policies as Scalia of bolstering up the conservative corporate majority. Mm-hmm. So that they're positive, at least they filled the position. And that was a kind of a lost hope of the Democrats, that they could stall that off until Hillary was elected. Well, Hillary wasn't elected, so we had to have 9 justices on there. And it was against the Democrats. So getting back now to the fate of Donald Trump and comparison of Trump with previous presidents, I would like to say that Franklin D. Roosevelt indeed passed dozens of significant bills which became law. And every journalist and every pundit in the two-party polling systems come up with very different numbers when doing mass polling. I have never had much confidence in any poll since Harry S. Truman defeated Governor Thomas E. Dewey of New York in 1948. Polling organizations became big business, competing with the advertising industry and public relations firms. Now, I supported Vermont Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary in November of 2016 against Hillary Clinton. In my mind, he was the first Jew to try to become president. I would rather have an honest Jew than the many crooked nominal Christians who seem to be competing and corrupting American society for either money or power. In the general election, both Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and I voted for Hillary Clinton. We had no other alternative. Senator Bernie Sanders claimed that America is now run by a financial oligarchy. Dollars can buy votes and dollars can buy polls. Since Donald Trump used Facebook and Twitter, I'll say that again, I'm getting senile. Since Donald Trump uses Facebook and Twitter, he no longer has to pay attention to any TV or newspaper polls. So far, Trump has made two relevant decisions. And now I've kind of repeated those again. He has appointed Neil Gorsuch, Supreme Court, and the rubber stamp Senate never raised any questions. They should have had some kind of a hearing, but they just voted blank. So far, Trump has, second he appointed a competent Secretary Tillerson. We've already said something about that. The Affordable Care Act has been totally stalled, and most Trump voters are being threatened by mostly a stalemated Congress. The first six presidents, Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, and John Quincy Adams, were nominal Christians publicly. Personally, as readers of history and philosophy, they had advanced Unitarian or deist interpretations of the Bible. The majority of people and office holders are laymen, and they have little time or theological or historical or philosophical time to study. In a majority of the cases, their wives had the duty to educate their children with the aid of churches and Sunday schools. Abraham Lincoln knew more about the Bible than any president of the United States. He memorized most of the text at home, but never attended church until he moved to Washington. He then attended the Presbyterian Church to avoid rumors by the Southerners and their collaborators that he was a, quote, unbeliever. Now, after his death, most biographers assumed that he was a Unitarian at heart. Franklin Delano Roosevelt attended the Episcopal Church, the most prestigious church in the United States. America's top presidents all had the wisdom of balancing religious values, ethics, morality, and democracy as the wave of the future. Now, going back in time, Machiavelli in 1513 claimed in the first political science essay called The Prince that any politician has to acquire power. He has to behave as if he were a Christian. But behind the table, the prince is clever like a fox and powerful like a lion. Balance of power politics works on a short-term basis and succeeds for maybe 10 or 20 years. The period of history in Europe from 1815 to 1914 was the longest century of peace in the history of Europe. Neither Europe nor the United States has fully recovered from the great catastrophe of the First World War. There are few Americans who have a clue of how the regional balance of power would work in the greater Middle East. The State Department would like to be able to make a deal with Turkey, Egypt, Iran, and Saudi Arabia to serve the American stock and bond markets. The problem in the Middle East today is that the state of Israel is assuming that Zionism has won in 1948, but it is now on the defensive morally. A regional balance of power at this time is impossible because the four big Middle East powers, Turkey, Iran, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, are all jockeying as to who would become number one in any Middle East region. Regional balance of power. Okay, question. From your reading of Machiavelli, do you see any lessons that Machiavelli may have for the future of America?
Well, I think that people like Henry Kissinger and Roy Cohn, Trump's mentor, and Roger Stone, another Trump advisor, and people like that have been reading Machiavelli for quite some time. Roger Ailes.
Right.
They've been not only reading Machiavelli, but employing Machiavelli.
I don't know. Do we have any evidence they've actually read it?
Well, only by methods. I'm fairly certain
They're called
Kissinger
Machiavelli.
has.
It's easy to call somebody a Machiavellian.
Yeah, but if you actually, if you look at what they've done, I mean, I know that Kissinger has.
Oh yes,
instance.
definitely, no question about that.
And
because he was an advocate of the balance of power.
I'd wager quite a bit that Roger Ailes did.
I had to
a lot
read
of others
Machiavelli
did.
just to get a history degree.
Well, I did too, and I didn't have to read him for school. I read him because my political enemies read him and study him and use him.
Okay.
And so I think, does he have any usefulness for the future of America? More progressives should read him and
what can the
figure out at least
how to answer it.
How to answer it, yeah.
Oh yeah, well, I think that George Orwell had an answer to Machiavelli. And he invented this idea of perpetual war, okay? He predicted the future. There would be small wars using the atomic bomb. He underestimated the power of atomic energy. But his theory in 1984 was that there would be a short war in which one bomb is used, and the balance of power was between the three big superstates, Oceania, which meant the United States, England, and the so-called Rimland, Japan, and so forth. And then there were two Eurasian powers, Eurasia, which meant the Soviet Union, and East Asia, which meant China. Well, these three big superpowers would operate this balance of power, and there'd be a short war. One of them is defeated, and A and B would join up against C. But as soon as C was defeated, then there would be a rivalry between A and B, so A would join C to now use the next war against B, you see. And it would just perpetuate itself every 20 years, you see.
Yeah.
So that was his idea, that the balance of power would ultimately destroy certainly Europe and probably the whole world.
Yeah. And that makes sense. Actually, that kind of goes along with what Machiavelli had to say about...
well, but Machiavelli only had swords. You can recover from saddle.
No, I just mean about how he wrote about wedging power.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
if you have one power, it's better to make alliances with smaller powers and wedge them against your main rival power. And
that's
things
exactly
like that.
what Kissinger did. He says, I want the United States in the middle, and we have China and the Soviet Union on the two ends.
And that's what and that's a big driver, wedging your opposition in whatever ways that you can. And honestly, as brutal as it is, on a real politic level,
It
it
works.
works.
It works. Henry Kissinger had the best foreign policy, well, we'll say since Roosevelt, because he at least got Nixon out of the Indochina War. And he said, Nixon, you cannot fight ideology. You have to divide China as a state and Russia as a state. And if you withdraw and drop this communism thing, see, ideology contradicts the balance of power. That's called reason of state. And of course, we had a famous English advocate of the balance of power who said, England has no permanent enemies. We have no permanent enemies. We only have permanent interests. And the interest of England is the protection of the Suez Canal. So in the history of England, they have been allied and the enemy of all of the other. They've been allied to France, they've been allied to Germany, they've been allied to Austria, they've been allied to, and they've also been the enemy, as in Spain, we have to put in there. Spain was a great power when England began. And they tied up with the smaller powers to weaken Spain, and once Spain was weakened, then they had to tilt against France. And then when Germany rose, they had to ally with with France in order to weaken Germany. So you always get the preponderance of power on your side, preferably in the middle, or else tilting the scale way down at the bottom. That's how the balance of power works. It's it's dynamic. It's always shifting, because the other four powers can walk back and forth on the scale. Japan and Italy, from World War I, both changed sides. And that gave Hitler no confidence. Right. Anyway, that's how the balance of power. It might work for 10, 20. Now, in the case of the 19th century, it worked for almost 100 years. Now, there was a Crimean War, but the point of the Crimean War, it was a bilateral war. It didn't bring all the powers in. World War I brought in all of the powers. You have to have limited bilateral wars. The American Civil War didn't interrupt the global balance. It was a regional balance within the 20 states, no, the 20 states they had at that time. 11 states in the Confederacy. But Lincoln understood the balance of power. He had to be allied to England to keep
he worked so hard to keep England neutral and not supplying the Confederacy.
Right.
You know, one of his main allies was Karl Marx himself.
Well, Karl Marx sympathized with the Confederacy, but I don't think that Lincoln read any of Karl Marx.
I don't know about whether Lincoln read him or not. All I know is that Karl Marx was an ally in keeping...
He was sympathetic to the North.
Right.
Because slavery was obviously the working class.
Yeah, so and he worked to keep those European countries out of the conflict.
That's right, in socialism. Yes, right. Socialism gained power, strength. And Karl Marx did write journalism for the New York Herald. He was published in the United States. But it depended, and only that was the New York paper. Well, a lot of people in the North started reading Marx. And then, of course, after the Civil War, Marxism gained, and we had a new Socialist International. The first international was organized by Marx. The second one was organized by 15 socialist parties from 1889, after Marx's death, and they lasted until 1914. Then the Russian Revolution of 1917 led to Lenin creating the Third International, or the Communist International, and that led, in part, to the Second World War. Indirectly and directly. That's another story.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess what we were talking about here. I want to get back to my text now. Yeah. Okay, so the problems of the balance of power. Okay, so if Trump is impeached, okay, I guess I'm going to be winding up my comment on the balance of power. So I'm going into a new topic now. My conclusion is, if Trump is impeached by Democratic propaganda for not being sufficiently protective of Israel, that could backfire. The problem in the minds of the patriotic but divided American voters are that uninformed cannot tell the difference between complex history and simple propagandistic slogans and sound bites. So, the next question, is a dual dictatorship possible? If Donald Trump refuses to step down, or if he is impeached, can he be protected by some general who refuses to obey his oath to the Constitution? Got any theories on that? Any speculations?
On whether, on
Okay,
what do you mean?
I'll state the question again.
Okay.
Slowly. Okay. Is it possible that a dual dictatorship, if Trump refuses to step down, or if he's impeached, can he be protected by some general who refuses to obey his oath to the Constitution?
I don't think...
Can he have a kind of a military alliance and defy the electoral process?
I don't
think it's possible?
I think that America's institutions are too strong.
Hopefully, you're right. Hopefully, the generals will all be faithful.
I don't see any one general with that much power and influence that did what you're talking about. Basically, is Trump making an alliance with the general, and both of them being in open defiance of the U.S. Constitution, in open defiance of their own oaths.
Yeah.
To preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. It would be the United States falling victim to an attempted military coup. And I don't think...
There is a TV pundit we have on television.
Yeah.
You've heard of Cliff McCarthy and his son? His son is Dane McCarthy.
Oh, okay.
He has his own program.
Dane, yeah.
Yeah, he always announces his show.
Yeah.
The police state, the United Police State, America. He always thinks it's over.
Yeah.
But he's a novelist. I don't have too much faith in him. But he has a good show.
I don't believe. I believe that America's
we're still alive. The democracy
are strong enough that we couldn't fall victim to military coup.
But it's still alive. Okay. Well, I just wanted to bring up the example of Adolf.
I don't believe that. I mean, I believe that it's conceivable that he may attempt such a thing, but I don't think it's conceivable that he would succeed.
Well, I had in mind when I provoked that question that Adolf Hitler's propaganda minister was Joseph Goebbels. And Joseph Goebbels worshipped the ground that Hitler walked on for psychological reasons. He had an inferiority complex. Now, Spain's General Franco was a quasi-fascist and never a complete totalitarian. He was dependent on Hitler and Mussolini for arms from 1936 to 1945. Economically, he was dependent on the United States and Great Britain for oil, tin, jute, cotton, and other raw materials and high technical manufacturers. So I am now introducing a new analysis of Donald Trump as his partner, Steve K. Bannon. Here is the possible dual dictatorship. This was outlined in a book by Joshua Green called The Devil's Bargain, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the President, published in New York this year, by the Penguin Press. Joshua Green is a hopeful liberal Democrat, and he has been working for the Bloomberg Business Week as a young journalist and educated at Northwestern University. He's possibly Jewish. Green's book is outlined in a review by Sam Tannenhouse, The Making of the Tabloid President, published in New York Review of Books, August 2017. Tannenhouse is also a journalist who specializes in exposing right-wing conservatives. Tabloid, the word tabloid, is a put-down which might be exaggeration of Trump as a clown. According to Green, Bannon was a media mogul who ran Breitbart News and was also Trump's main propagandist, surpassing Fox News. They both propagated vulgarity, sexual harassment, scandal, and made it an end run around Roger Ailes and the Fox channel. Unlike Goebbels and Hitler, Bannon and Trump are propaganda twins and are competitors to dominate Facebook, vulgarity, and sexuality. Bannon began as a working-class Catholic who grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and started out as an anti-communist hack, educated by the Benedictines in a Virginia military school. He began as a hater of Jimmy Carter. He went to Harvard Business School and got a job with Goldman Sachs. Both Trump and Bannon gravitated toward each other through the mass media. Bannon modeled himself after a Nazi filmmaker, Leni Riefenstahl. Leni Riefenstahl did film work propagating Adolf Hitler's party days, which became a substitute for a rubber stamp parliament. This was the most famous and successful propaganda film created for the Fuhrer, called The Triumph of the Will. Came out in 1935. Bannon's film was called The Face of Evil, which glorified Ronald Reagan. After he met Trump, he began to reinforce Trump's pornographic videos in The Apprentice in 2004. Bannon is more sophisticated than Trump and advised Trump to put a few token blacks in the corporate executive positions in order to win a few black voters. Both Trump and Bannon are financed by a hedge fund billionaire, Robert Mercer. In March of 2017, Andrew Breitbart was the founder of Breitbart News Network, dropped dead at age 43. Bannon decided to use Mercer's money to continue running Breitbart's news network. Bannon provided polling data against the Clintons for Trump's campaign. Bannon focused his research on international affairs and may make Trump's tweets more acceptable to foreign diplomats trying to make sense of another P.T. Barnum who goes off in dozens of directions. As an authoritarian conservative like Bannon, who worked for Vice President Steve Pence, could be more of a problem for democracy than the many contradictory statements of this New York State real estate dealer. So that's my analysis of this pessimistic historian who think it's conceivable. Do you reject it all? As far beyond the pale?
I think
He's just a propagandist for his own book.
no. I mean, I understand the point that he's making, and I certainly wouldn't want
You're suspicious of Bannon.
I certainly don't believe in underestimating my enemies.
Okay.
I don't think that old Niccolo would recommend such.
Yeah.
But I also, I mean, while I don't want to underestimate Steve Bannon's machinations, I also don't want to underestimate the strength of American institutions
That's right.
to stand up
I do
to
too.
would-be dictators
I
and
hope so.
autocrats. And I also don't want to underestimate the American people's intolerance for such a thing.
But now the American people, that's a fuzzy word.
Well, you look at, I mean, look at the polls, for instance. Donald Trump's job approval rating is in the dumps.
But how do we make those polls? How
And,
do we
and you
transfer
see the riots
to
in
votes?
Charlottesville. You see the Women's March after
Yeah.
the
How do we-
inauguration.
yeah, fine.
I don't think that the people. I think that you would create mass chaos, which also creates an opportunity to establish a certain amount of authoritarianism and dictatorship if there is mass chaos. And maybe that would be part of the goal if that's what
Okay.
Steve Bannon wanted to
Okay.
do, because everyone who's really studied power and authoritarianism knows that when you create chaos, and Orwell wrote about this in his essays, you create a desire in the people for stability at any cost, and that's when they're willing to give up a lot of rights
That's
because
what happened
they want
in Franco's Spain.
and
That's what happened in Franco's
exactly. They just want stability.
Spain. And that's what brought Margaret Thatcher to power.
Right, right.
The Labour Party
Yeah.
overshot their claims, you see.
Yeah.
So these are the dangerous signs, I guess,
Yeah.
is what we're saying.
And I think that you have to anticipate that would be part of the design.
Yeah, right.
But I just don't believe, I believe in the strength of American institutions. I don't believe that our democracy is that ill. I know that it's sick right now, it's got a cough. I don't believe that it is terminally ill in that way.
Well, hopefully the next 2 to 4 years will prove that. But supposing Trump gets elected the first time, re-elected, then we got to go for a second term.
Yeah.
We got to keep that hope alive. That was Jesse Jackson say, "Keep hope alive."
Yeah.
That was his parting slogan. But I'm glad he ran, and I'm glad you and I are keeping the debate going. Anyway, next question. Have you seen a September 2017 article in the Athens Messenger entitled "Kushner Heads to Israel for the Latest Attempt at a Peace Deal"? It shows again the effectiveness of AIPAC as a lobby. You will note that there are two authors, one presumably a Christian and the other presumably Jewish. The readers cannot know for sure unless he does some research on the two authors, Tracy Williamson and Neil Berman, Neil Byman. Noah Byman, that's the possible Jew. Noah Byman and Tracy Wilkerson. Those are the two authors of this article. So looking at the Christian-Jewish problem, I had the advantage of meeting many Jews in Nassau County in New York until I was 18 years old. At Bates College, 1948 to 1950, I had my best friends were one Greek and three Jews. In dental school in 1951, over 90% of the students were Jewish. At the University of Michigan Law School, of the three students who impressed me, the most important was a Jewish professor of philosophy who was taking a postgraduate course in law school because in 1952-53, he wanted to develop a new specialty called legal philosophy. He and I had many personal conversations. Teaching at the University of Maine from 1961 to 64, my best friend was a Jewish economist. What strikes me about the article of Wilkerson and Bierman is that Trump remains popular in Israel, and Benjamin Netanyahu is Trump's closest ally. As a result of the Charlottesville, Virginia massacre, many Jews were outraged, and I am struck by the word many. When I was stationed in the 7th Army headquarters in Stuttgart, Germany, I was attempting to write an article in my spare time. Sometime between October 1955 and April of 1956, I knew that Jewish editors were smarter than Christian writers. After a professional journalist edited my manuscript, one of the lessons I learned was never write the term "the Jews." One should write few, some, many, or most. Even better is to write individual names of people a scholar wants to write about. Looking at Trump's wart-like speeches on the 21st of August 2017, he wants to, 1, expand the American war in Afghanistan. 2, Trump needs no new congressional resolution. It is simply called by the media Trump's war against terrorism. Point 3, Trump says we will win. There are 11,000 U.S. troops now stationed in Afghanistan. Who are the we inside Trump's administration? Michael Beschloss, a TV professional historian, thinks that Trump's claim of victory was unwise. The Vietnam War continued despite the protests of Senator Eugene McCarthy of Minnesota and Robert Kennedy of New York and George McGovern of South Dakota. The U.S. taxpayers paid 100% of the cost of the stalemate regime in Saigon. Johnson and Nixon expanded the Indo-Chinese wars by expanding the national debt beyond the ability to raise taxes. Trump calls for India to put down the military force in helping the Afghan regime in Kabul. This is a kind of a help that would not be welcomed by any of the 5 language groups in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a geographical region of multiple tribes and has never been a potential unified nation state. Senator Bernie Sanders claimed that the America is now run by a financial oligarchy. Dollars can buy votes, dollars can buy polls. Since Donald Trump uses Facebook and Twitter, he has no longer any need to pay attention to any TV or newspaper polls. So far, Trump has made 2 relevant decisions. Yes, Neil Gorsuch, Supreme Court, and Rex Tillerson. The Affordable Care Act has been totally, I guess we've been over that. I guess I'm kind of repeating myself. I guess this is out of order here. We talked about Machiavelli. Yeah, that's
We've got about 2 minutes left.
yeah. Well, I kind of got mixed up here, and I got some question for it. Well, we put down tabloid. Well, I guess we'll have to stop here. We've gone. Okay, we'll stop at this point. We've been talking about the possibility of Trump's campaign, and I think I will simply say that neither one of us want Trump, but there is a possibility that naive voters could be exploited with the help of some military conspirator. It's not totally out of reason if you look at Hitler, Franco, and Spain, and some of the lessons of history. Anyway, what is your summary?
Well, I think that from what we've talked about today, there is a lot of times you hear people say, oh, that can't happen, it's 2017.
Yeah.
As though 2017 matters. You can never let your guard down against authoritarianism. You can never let your guard down against fascism and the interests that would subjugate people and take away freedoms and liberties. And we've got to be ever vigilant against that and ever on our guards as much as possible in 2017, in 2027, in 1917, and every other year that human beings exist on this planet. So never let our guards down.
And you
be ever
reminded me
vigilant.
of a famous American politician who said that liberty requires eternal vigilance.
Eternal vigilance. That's right, Professor.
I forgot who said that. Anyway, the slogan of this show is debate is the oxygen of democracy, and you and I have to keep the debate alive.
We shall. Thank you.